everyone. Thank you for joining us again this morning as we spend time in God's Word together, specifically in John chapter 2. I want to encourage you each morning to read ahead of time each chapter or read afterwards that we can best cover everything, because in a 10-minute video we can't cover everything. So I'm going to do my best to run through this as fast as we can, but also to give you enough content to see what's going on here. John 2 is incredible. I absolutely love this chapter in John. It's probably one of my favorite chapters in John, only because it's my favorite sign and wonder that he does in this gospel, turning the water to wine. I'll explain here in a second. Because the main reason, though, is that every time we see a sign and wonder in this gospel, you'll see a teaching or a message to follow that communicates why that sign and wonder was necessary. It kind of sets up a message afterwards, either to the audience he performed it in front of or the audience he's getting ready to talk to next. But in John chapter 2, we're just a couple of days after following, or after meeting all the disciples. We're about 3 days after he met Nathanael. And here he is at a wedding in Cana. And weddings in that time were absolutely huge in Hebrew culture. They had a grand party. It was like one of the grandest life events you could have. And still to this day, it's kind of like that, but not to the extreme that they would do in this time period. This would be an evening celebration where there's just be a massive party, where that party would go for days, where they would be ushered back in a parade style back to their home, and they would basically, instead of a honeymoon, have an open house for a week where all their friends, all their guests would come stay with them, party with them. But at this event, they would have a lot of wine. And wine in that time period, and even see throughout the Old Testament and Judges, also in the book of Psalms, joy or wine was a symbolic form of joy. To have much wine was to have much joy, to much need to celebrate. At this wedding in particular, Mary's helping out behind the scenes, and Jesus is there with his new disciples, and they ran out of wine, which would be a very shameful thing for a party to do. That'd be a terrible host to run out of wine for these people. So Mary comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, they're out of wine. What are you going to do about it?" And Jesus says, "Woman, my time has not yet come." And at first that sounds like an insult, but it's not. It's actually a term of endearment that he uses again later when addressing his mother from the cross. He's not meaning anything bad about the way he calls her woman. I just don't encourage you to call your mother a woman. But he says, "My hour has not yet come." That word "hour" is actually, we'll use 6 more times in John's gospel. He's actually talking about a specific moment that he's looking forward to. He's talking about a specific time that is ahead of him. And that time, that hour, is his crucifixion. That time where he will fully and completely reveal himself, and he'll go to the cross, and he'll be crucified, and he'll be killed. That's the moment he's talking about. So when he says, "My time has not yet come," what he's referring to is that it's not fully time for him to reveal himself yet. Not fully time to reveal who he is. But he does reveal himself, but in a small setting, only to his disciples and to his mother. He obeys his mother and says to these people, says, "Hey, go get those purification jars, those 6 purification jars, and fill them with water to the brim." And it's very specific the way John writes, and I hope you don't miss some of these little tiny details that he writes with. But by using the purification jars, he's using something that was known in the religious settings from the Levitical law in Exodus 30, where the Levitical priests would have to wash themselves from the water from these purification jars before entering the temple. You read Leviticus, there was different ceremonial and cleansing laws that people had to follow, and they would use these jars. And by using these jars, Jesus is getting ready to reveal something, not just about himself, but something greater about what he's bringing. Basically to say in this entire chapter, in this story and the next story, that the old is gone, the old has been fulfilled in me, in Jesus, and he is now here to usher in the new. So they take these 6 jars, 20 to 30 gallons roughly, so I think we're upwards of 180 gallons of water, and he turns it into wine, showing that he has power over earthly elements, which is pretty awesome. But they send the wine out, and the host, the guy who was basically running the party, comes over to the groom and says, "Hey, why did you save the best wine for last?" Usually what would happen is that they would take the best wine first, and as people kept having more and more and more, the wine quality would go less, and they wouldn't know. They've already had all the good stuff, and they're a little tipsy, and now they have this lesser quality. But here it says, "You brought the best last." And again, Jesus is now showing you by this story, the best is now here. the greatest is now here. And because of this story, because of what happens in that sign and wonder, it says that his disciples believed, that they followed who he now really was, as he's ushering in the new, fulfilling the old Mosaic law in himself, saying the old is gone, the new is here. But that story sets up what gets ready to happen as they go to Jerusalem at Passover. And if you remember from Exodus, Passover is a grand celebration because of how God brought them out of Egypt and how he delivered them by the angel passing over their doorsteps because of the blood of the lamb that was there. And when you come to Jerusalem at Passover, there'd be upwards of hundreds of thousands of people coming to the city, coming to the temple to worship, to make a sacrifice, to atone for all the things they'd done in the previous year. And as they come to the temple that Solomon built, to explain the temple, there was inner courts and outer courts. In the very center was the Holy of Holies, and outside of that was the court where the priests could go, and outside of that was the court where the Jews could go, and outside of that was the court where the Gentiles could go, and outside of that was the court where the women could go. And they come into the court of Gentiles, where they couldn't go any further, the non-Jews. This is where they could worship. And they find a bunch of merchants and traders selling off livestock. And what actually they're selling is pigeons, oxen, sheep, and that's the very things people would use to make a sacrifice at Passover. So they're selling the very things that people were expected to bring to the temple. And by selling it to them, there was no obedience, there was no reverence, there was no joy. Just as the wine represented joy and the joy is gone, that's what that story ultimately was, that the joy was gone. Here, the reverence is gone. The reverence for God, the thought of the holiness of God is gone, and it's now something minor. And the crazy thing, what we find out is actually that the one who set it up, even the people who set this up were the religious leaders, the high priest, Annas. This was all at their command. One, to make a little money, but also to just not have a high reverence of God, a high view of God. And so they come to the temple and they see this, and this meek and mild Jesus that we usually think about transforms all of a sudden and becomes furious and angered and forms a whip and clears out the temple. Not really the story we think of when we think of what would Jesus do, but we must remember that Jesus is passionate about worship. Jesus is passionate about the view of God, and that's what he's getting upset about. But he says to them, why have you turned my house, why have you turned this temple into a place of trade, a place of selling goods? And they said, what sign do you show us? These religious leaders said, what sign do you show us to back this up? He says, destroy this temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And they think, why would you destroy the temple that Solomon built over those 40 years? It took a long time to build this temple. Why would you destroy it? But Jesus wasn't even talking about the temple. He's talking about himself. He said, reject me, destroy me, and I'll rebuild myself in 3 days. See, in John chapter 1, Jesus says, or John wrote that we have seen his glory, and there was those who believed and those who received him and are now children of God. Those are his disciples who just now believed in him. But there's also the people who said he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. They rejected him. That's these Jews who he's coming to right now, these Pharisees who should have known who he was because of what they believed. So they did not know him. But what he's doing, he's establishing, just like with the purification jars, that this temple is not going to be the place of worship anymore. This is not going to take, the atoning sacrifices won't be necessary because I'm going to be the one who makes a sacrifice for all. Hebrews says he made that one atoning sacrifice for all. And I'm going to be your atonement. I'm going to be your sacrifice. I'm going to be that lamb that you celebrate getting slain for your deliverance. And by doing all of this, he's establishing once again that the old is gone, the new has come. And it says that many believed in him because of this. And I just want to ask you this morning as we consider these few things, just a few questions as you continue to study throughout the day, as you continue to read later today. The first, have you experienced that greatest thing? Have you experienced that the best is now available to you? You're trying to find joy in everything, trying to find satisfaction in everything, but you can't find it. I promise you, and just as we look here, that you can find it in Jesus. The best is here, and it's available to you. The second thing I want to ask you is, have you ever experienced that transforming power? He can turn water to wine, but he can also transform your life. I think about the song New Wine, which fits so applicably with this, that he can transform you, he can make you new if you let him. Have you experienced that transforming power? And the third, if you think about the story of the clearing of the temple, it says now that we are now the temple of the Holy Spirit, that glory that filled the Old Testament tabernacle, the Old Testament temple, is now living inside of us as Christians. But is there anything in the way of that glory filling our temple, filling our hearts? If Jesus would walk into your situation right now, would he clear your temple? Think about those things as you go about the day. I love you guys. Hopefully we'll see you soon. If not, we'll see you back on here tomorrow morning. Have a great day.